Hey kids, it's Jurassic James, and on this Jurassic James Explains, we're looking at worms. Now, first of all, I talk about essentially cnidarians, which are coral and sea jellies, and I talk about echinoderms, which are sand dollars, sea urchins, sea stars. I talk about mollusks, which are clams, snails, and squid. All these different groups. Worms is not an official phylum name or class name. It's just a group of animals that have similar body designs, but they're not related to each other directly. So when you say the word worm, they're like earthworms and they're leeches, but also pinworms that get in your bloodstream and all these things. So it's a very broad group. So I kind of just put it all together as one section because in the fossil record, there's very few worm evidence. And two, I didn't want to make a page for each worm group. It's just worms. So normally I go, from the oldest to the youngest. I'm going to go backwards today and start with the earthworms we all know. I will tell you, if you see here, finding worm models is very hard. They're not common. I remember it was one of my birthdays, we found the last teacher supply store in Houston, and they had the life cycle of earthworms, and I was super excited. I got them, and my wife bought them for me actually. And I remember it was funny because the next day at work, people were like, "What you do for your birthday?" I'm like, "My wife gave me worms." Anyway, so the life cycle starts with essentially has the eggs of the baby worms that you're seeing here, those teacher things, and the babies hatch from the egg, and then it grows into an adult worm like this, and then it meets another adult worm and they kiss, and then that one of the worm has eggs like this, and then the eggs hatch and rinse and repeat. So one thing about earthworms is that people see them and they're like, "These are disgusting, I hate them, they're awful." Earthworms are super amazing, awesome. Appreciate them, love them, help them if you can. They're super awesome. The idea is very simple. Earthworms are in a group called annelids, and annelids is a phylum for most of the worms we kind of know and deal with on a daily basis. And these guys aerate soils, meaning that they're sediment feeders. They eat the dirt, they absorb whatever nutrients, and they poop out like other stuff. So they're actually opening up the soils. I think it was somewhere in either England or Britain. I think it's Britain, where they had these fields with sheep grazing, and the earthworms were aerating the soil, and there was some kind of either predator or fungus or something that was killing the worms. So because the worms were all dying in the region, the soil was not being aerated, and then it dropped down and it would get muddy and it would rain, and the sheep began getting like infections in their feet and stuff like that. They're super important. And the idea is that these things are, people see them, they're so grossed out by them, but they're so awesome as far as the environment goes. But in the fossil record, we have, first of all, these are all from the Cambrian period, and particularly I had a lot of them are from the Cambrian. Actually, no, only one of them's from the Cambrian tube. I'll go over it later on. So here we have a worm called Ottoia. Now, Ottoia, it's a proper worm. This is from a company that's very, very hard to find. This is from the Cambrian tube. And they are thought to be related to the modern cactus worms, which means we see a Cambrian over half of a million, 500 million years ago. Sorry, focus. We have these worms. We have modern ones that look very similar to them. Now, it's debated whether or not they are the direct ancestors or just their own group of prapal, because they're called prapal worms, the modern group. And they're often called archaeoprapal or basoprapal, whatever. But the idea is that these worms are burrowing. So right before the Cambrian in the Ediacaran time, we don't have burrowing animals. There's a layer of bacteria that denies animals the ability to burrow down to the mud. By the Cambrian period, we have these guys, and they're found like in burrows, and they have this little anchor kind of looking thing here and spikes on them to kind of stay in the actual soil like that. And then the mouth part, this part here is thought to actually extend. And then these parts have sharp bits on the inside. So they're actually grabbing prey. And what's really fun about Ottoia is that, the bird's shell is a shell, it's mudstone, it's a black rock. And these are all worms, they're soft parts. So they have imagine taking a black rock, a chalkboard black rock, and taking a pencil and just doing that on it. And that kind of shiny, glossy graphite look is how these guys look in their fossil form. So for the earliest people Watt in 1911 to look at these fossils and realize they were worm-like things and to write them up was really a big deal. Nowadays we scan stuff and computer, that's all. It's much more technical, and we find their prey in their stomachs basically. So we see what they're actually eating. So they're hiding in this mud and then coming out and grabbing stuff and pulling it back in. That's terrifying, And again, this is almost a little bit smaller, bigger than life size actually. So to have this kind of as a model is really, really a special thing. Now the next guy we have is called Hallucigenia. Now, again, the models I'm showing you, these ones that are like in pieces, those are from a company that I don't think they make them anymore. They discontinued them, so they're online. But you would get them to put them together. So, and when Hallucigenia was first discovered in like 1911 or 1912, one of the two, they saw the row of spines, 2 rows of spines. They only saw 1 row of arms like this. You see the arms there. So it was assumed that in that time that it walked around on the spines, and the arms may have been how it fed, or that it would grab food and then pass it from arm to the mouth, basically. And they really couldn't tell where was the front and where was the back. They assumed the bulbous area was the front. And the idea behind that's really neat is because, for one thing, the name Hallucigenia means hallucinogen. That you're not sure what it is. It's very dreamy and trippy, right? Luckily, paleontology is global. So over time, people were digging again and again, and they found a very similar age site in China, and they had very similar life forms, and they're naming their own species. They're very, So it turns out they found a Hallucigenia relative, and here's a newer model. And the idea is that bulbous area wasn't there. The spines are on top, and the bottom part, with the little grabbers like this, those are actually the feet. So it's walking around, and they have little tiny arms here, and the head is very narrow. And the idea, they have little eyes on the edge of it, but the head is very narrow. And the idea is that the neck, we can actually see a neck where the head's bulbous, and it gets thinner for the neck, and then the body starts. So, and there is no bulbous part in the end; it's just more legs like that. So the idea is there's actually 3 different species of Hallucigenia, and with that newer discovery, they looked to the old original fossils found, and it turns out the second row of legs were in matrix. So the rock the fossils in is called the matrix. So apparently it was right there, but the other row of legs were just kind of in the rock. So when they saw the surface, they only saw 1 layer, which is really kind of cool and annoying. But now you can scan everything and see everything perfectly, or prep really, the prep work and cleaning the fossils has been really, really advanced since then. So Hallucigenia is now well known. Now as far as its grouping, it's not an annelid like an earthworm, because annelids include earthworms and like leeches, and also the guys that are in the tubes in the deep ocean. These are thought to be closer to the velvet worm. So arthropods are the bugs like trilobites and roaches and all that. There's a bigger group that arthropods are a part of called Panarthropoda, and that includes the tardigrade, the water bear per se, and then also the velvet worms. So it's thought to be in that kind of group. And that's Hallucigenia. So here we have Ottoia, no, that's Ottoia, Ashina, and this guy was found it has arms, first of all, like velvet worms, just hinting at what people think, or scientists think could be a group. It has little arms in the front, little legs, and a mouth part. So the idea is that these are often found in or around sponges. So the number one prevailing hypothesis is it actually lives in sponges. Well, actually, the first hypothesis is it eats sponges, right? It's eating sponge cells. The other hypothesis that was kind of older was that it actually lives in the sponge, and as the sponge is filter feeding, it's grabbing its own part of the food, like that. Or it's animals that are hiding around sponges kind of grabbing them too. But it's not like a voracious go out and grab them predator. It's just something that's more picking up food here and there. So this is another very interesting fossil from Cameroon. Ironically, Ottoia and Hallucigenia, way more focus on these guys, way more understanding on them. This guy, Aysheaia, not very much known. So it's by comparison. But again, really cool animal. And these models in my hand are all bigger than the actual fossil, I believe, or close to 1:1. But they're a part of this Cameroon time period, this ecology. It's really, really neat and really well known. So again, worms are a big group, but because it's not actually a group. Worms are several groups that share tube-like bodies that people just call worm, basically. And it's unfortunate, but worm awareness isn't something that's really big in people's minds. And in the fossil record, the number one way, these are unique because they're carbon imprints in soft shell mud, but most worms are known from burrows, like holes in the ground, that they make. So we see that they are there. But even then, they're then trace fossils, and trace fossils are named differently. So we can't quite say this worm made this burrow. We just know that this burrow exists in this time frame, basically. On my experience in Seymour, Texas, in the Permian, I remember there's worm burrows. We were in near Johnson City, and there were Cretaceous worm tubes and things. So that's something I see there. And of course, the worms in the Permian I saw were like, they created different kind of structures. They weren't just burrowing, they actually had these little fan-like structures. So anyway, pretty cool. That being said, these are the worm models out there. If you can find these guys, let me know. If you find a source for more worm stuff, put it in the comments below. Thank you very much, and I'll see you guys later.